Welcome to today's book talk with Cornell professor Marianne Krasny. And also joining us is the book's editor and cartoonist and illustrator, Emily Hopkins. Welcome to the studio, you two. Thanks for joining us today on the keynote.
Thanks for having us.
That's right. So today's show is produced in partnership with Cornell University, who have kindly offered a 33% discount in this together. So we'll be sharing information in the chat. There's a discount code and the URL to purchase the book if you're interested. We will take questions throughout the conversation today, and there is an interactive component as well, so we will be kicking up a QR code that you can scan with your phones. I recommend you do that right now because we're going to start with a little audience polling and to find out a little bit about who's joining us today. So the first question, I have to kick that up, there it is where are you joining us from? So invariably we have international audiences join us for these. We'll see what kind of domestic versus international audience we have. Quite often Ithaca shows up pretty strong, but people join us from all over the country. So we'll see what these results look like. A couple other things as well. We're going to be sharing a ton of resources in the chat. A lot of URLs, additional resources that you can use to take action in your own particular way. So just heads up for that. There's going to be a lot of resources coming your way. And if you're watching the recording, which is after the live session today, a lot of those resources will be down in the overview below, right? So there's a lot there. So if you're watching the recording, check out any of the URLs that I've mentioned below. So let's check out our results. Looks like North Carolina is showing up real strong today. I don't know what that means, 3 North Carolinians or so. We'll see how we do with that. So poll results, yeah, primarily a domestic audience. Cool, thanks for your input with that. Let's move on to the next one, though. This one's a little bit more impactful and important and relevant to the conversation we're going to be having today, which is, which of these actions do you think are most effective to draw down climate emissions? Now, this looks like a multiple choice, but you can actually submit more than one answer to this. Don't click all 5. I think that would throw off our data set a little bit. So let's see how the answers come here. While we wait for the answers to this, I would like to turn it over to Emily Sanders-Hopkins and Marianne Krasny, who will kick off our book talk now. So Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be here. Hi, Marianne. In This Together, this wonderful book, is made of 5 main sections. Can you talk about how you chose those particular aspects of climate action to focus on?
Yes, thank you, Emily. Great to be here with you today and with Chris. So I'm just going to look at these results here, and it looks like from the answers, a bunch of you might be familiar with the Project Drawdown table of climate solutions, because I see a lot of you did plant-rich diet, reducing meat and cheese consumption, and reducing food waste, as well as providing health services and education to women around the globe. So if we can bring up the Project Drawdown slide. For those of you not familiar with Project Drawdown, it's a nonprofit organization that has produced, using scientific input, a table of over 80 climate solutions, and you can rank them in terms of which ones are most effective in drawing down greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And you can see that up at the top are reduced food waste, eating a plant-rich diet, and family planning and education, as well as some others like reforestation, refrigerant management as you go down. So getting back to the book, the question you asked, Emily, the 5 chapters, the first one's called Eat, and it's basically about plant-rich diet. The second one I think is called Glean, right? And it's about food waste. So the idea of gleaning is that farmers can allow people to come onto their properties, their farms, after they've done the big harvest, and that they can glean harvest that's left there that didn't get
picked up.
Yeah, picked up by the machines or the farm laborers, and that this is a way to reduce food waste. We'll probably talk about food waste a little bit more, but a huge problem, food waste in terms of the 3rd largest source of methane emissions in the U.S. Is food waste and other organic waste decomposing in landfills. So whatever we can do to keep it out of the landfill, the better.
So landfills are different from compost, I guess,
yes,
in their effect.
Right. So
interesting. So
when we think of food waste, we can think of a hierarchy of actions to reduce food waste, right? About 1/3 to 40%, about 30 to 40% of food produced in the U.S. is never consumed by the consumer.
Wow.
So the best thing we can do is repurpose it, which is food donation programs. We can also repurpose it as like animal feed, or in some cases for energy, and then sort of going down as composting, which still keeps it out of the landfill, but it's kind of a higher use value than reusing it, like food donation programs, or reusing it for energy or animal feed. So that's the two chapters. We got eat, we got glean. Third one is give, right?
Right.
Give. It's about donations. Thanks. I'm having a hard time remembering today. But the idea of give is that some of these actions, like, say, women's health and family planning, I think that's, what do we got? Family planning and education there. It's not something I'm really going to do in my everyday life. It's not a lifestyle action like reducing food waste or eating more fruits and vegetables and less meat and dairy. So for that, we can do philanthropy or donations to organizations that, for example, promote family planning and education.
Right, so all the sections of your book, eat, glean, volunteer, give, they're all things that people do. People
Yes.
that I could do.
The first four, you mentioned volunteer, which is the fourth, and that's getting involved in climate organizations that advocate for different policies. And then the last one, responsibility, is a little different, and that's answering this question of, given how large the climate crisis is and what a large role some of these industries like the oil and gas industry have played, how do I think about my own responsibility as an individual?
You coined the phrase network climate action. Can you talk about how you came up with that and what it means?
Yeah. So, I spend a lot of time thinking about this question of what's my role, what's my responsibility. I'm motivated to want to do something to reduce our climate emissions, but I have really struggled to find out an effective way to do that. So I came up with this idea of network climate action. It's a very simple idea. The first thing, it has only 2 steps. First is you figure out what's an effective action you can take yourselves. Those lifestyle actions like food waste, plant-rich diet, or things like donating to a women's organization that helps with educating and family planning. Second thing is you influence your social network, so your family, friends, those whom you know, who you're communicating with, to take that action alongside you. So with that, I thought we might show a short video of one of my students. I do network climate action in my Cornell courses, and the students choose an action, and they choose which network, so who they want to ask to take that action alongside them. And Danielle Levante was in my course last fall, and she was kind enough to record a short video about her network climate action.
I like her.
Hi, my name is Danielle Levante, and I'm a junior at Cornell studying environment and sustainability. And in my network climate action project, I wanted to address the carbon emissions associated with the typical American diet. And plant-based diets have a lot of positive health and ecological impacts and are one of the most effective ways to reduce one's carbon footprint. My project's main goal was to influence my network, which was a bunch of Cornell undergraduate students on my water polo team and just a lot of my friends, to eat plant-based for one day out of the week. And so what we did was we would share weekly meals, usually breakfast burritos at one of the campus eateries, or we'd have dinner together before practice at one of the dining halls. And sharing meals every week together helped my friends stay accountable for maintaining their diets. And this decision was informed by choice architecture and also strategic social nudges, where the habits were positively reinforced by getting meals with friends. And at these meals, we would also discuss the environmental and climate benefits of plant-based eating and just other ways to promote more sustainable food systems. And over time, plant-based dining became more habitual. And I hope that in the long run, my friends become more aware of environmentally conscious eating and just maintain their habits. Another really fun aspect of the project was going downtown and also to College Town to try different restaurants that had vegetarian and vegan dishes. And a lot of my friends and I became really inspired because we realized that these recipes were really simple and easy to make, especially in college. So we'll definitely be doing more of that this semester and next year. And some of my friends also became really involved with the project. My friends Zoe and MJ would send me pictures of their meals throughout the day. So I'd get a lot of text messages with salads and chili and things like that. And then my other friend Ho'ohila was thinking about becoming a vegetarian, and she made the switch during the project because she said she actually felt a lot better eating more plant-based. and felt that she was making a more environmentally and morally just decision. And at the culmination of my project, I measured success by calculating a carbon footprint and found that overall, compared to our typical diets versus the plant-based diet, we greatly reduced our carbon footprint. And then overall, my friends said that they really enjoyed the project and that they were going to be continuing with this more mindful plant-based eating and environment conscious eating.
Well, that was great. I really appreciated Danielle's video, and I think the important lesson there is that taking these network climate actions can be really fun. She talked about how she enjoyed trying out new meals with her friends, and it was a social activity.
Yeah, that's great. Can you describe a network climate action that you've taken?
Sure. Mine was a little more challenging. And what I decided to do was that my action was going to be buying offsets for air travel, and that my network initially was my colleagues in my department. For those of you who are Cornell alums or Cornell students, I work in Furneaux Hall. So it was my Furneaux Hall Department of Natural Resources and the Environment colleagues. And we worked with the Finger Lakes Climate Fund, which is an organization in Ithaca. We can cue up the slide for Finger Lakes Climate Fund. That's great, thank you. And they make it really easy to figure out how much money you should pay to offset a particular trip. You just enter it in their calculator, where you're leaving from, where you're going. The very unique and fun thing about the Finger Lakes Climate Fund, I should mention that they're not a certified offset program, but what they do is that they donate the money that I might put in there to offset my travel to low-income people in the Finger Lakes region. And those people use it, such as this woman in the photo, to weatherize their homes. And so it turned out that some of my colleagues, they were not so keen on offsetting their travel, but when they found out that there was not just an environmental reason, but a social reason, social good reason, then they were much more interested. So I really like the model for Finger Lakes Climate Fund. The website for Finger Lakes Climate Fund also allows us to create what they call carbon races teams. So you can see my team is Furneaux and Friends, and we're now in 4th place in terms of the amount of carbon that we've offset. I just would like to say that this was a challenging project in that it wasn't so easy. I thought I could just kind of convince, be an influencer.
You talk about it in the book. You talk about starting off really enthusiastic and hopeful that everyone was going to jump in.
Right.
And then you had some conversations with colleagues that didn't go as you expected.
No. It is a long process, and there's a lot of communication tips. We don't really have time to go into it now.
But they're in your book.
They're in my book, yes.
One of my favorite parts of your book is how you apply research about networks and strong and weak bonds of networks within networks to spreading behaviors from composting to becoming a vegan eater. Can you explain some of this research about networks?
Sure. So before we get to this particular diagram, I'm going to explain a little bit of a different set of research results. And I just want to mention that I went into this, as you kind of alluded to, thinking that everybody could be an influencer. Danielle would put a photo of her great vegan meal on there. All her Instagram friends or Snapchat, whatever the students are using now, would just immediately want to copy it because it looks so colorful and delicious. But I found out that most of us are not influencers. I definitely am not. And
I am, but go ahead.
Okay, well,
no, I'm not.
I'd need to talk to you. Okay, so Damon Santola, who is at the University of Pennsylvania, has done some great work on the differences between how diseases like the flu or the measles spread versus how complex behaviors like changing what you eat spread. And so you might remember a few years ago at both Minneapolis Airport, I remember both these in the newspaper, and at Disneyland, somebody went to the airport and to Disneyland, I don't think it was the same person, and they had the measles. And immediately there's an outbreak, right?
Right.
Those people didn't know each other. You know, that this is not a close, what we call a close-tie network. It was a very weak network. They probably just passed each other on a ride or in the airport. But that's a very easy thing to spread. the measles or the flu, for example. Very different results when you look at changing these climate behaviors. In these cases, what you really need is what's called a close tie network. So I'm more likely to be able to influence my close friends and my family than I am to have a big influence on even my colleagues. One of the things I learned when I did the Finger Lakes Climate Fund thing was that I could engage my family and close friends better than my colleagues. So the important thing is behaviors spread through close tie networks and not through these weak tie networks, the way diseases spread. So if we can go on to the next slide, this is just another way to explain that. So if you start over on the very left-hand side there and think of the person in the middle that the arrow is pointing at, we want to change her behavior. And one person, that other woman who has she's communicating to the person in the middle, she's already changed her behavior. So, right, so she's already, let's just say she eats a mostly plant diet. But she communicates with her friend, and that friend has not changed her behavior. The second diagram, 2 friends are communicating with that person, still doesn't change their behavior. Finally, the person in the middle is hearing it from 3 different messengers, and she does then adopt a plant-rich diet. So the point is, you need multiple messages from multiple messengers in order to change behaviors, and it's best if these are messengers with whom you have a relationship, an ongoing relationship with.
Right. You have to be ganged up on, bullied by more than one person. I love those diagrams because they make it very clear. Another question I wanted to ask you about is, what's the most likely way, given these diagrams, that half of the world starts to eat a vegan diet? And what would the effect be if suddenly 50% of humans on the planet were vegan?
Okay. So first off, why should we be vegan? And so we have a little diagram that Emily drew here. Thank you, Emily. And this is the climate emissions, the greenhouse gas impact of eating different foods. You can see at the bottom that beef and lamb are very, very high compared to other foods. And of course, way at the top, very low, are things like carrots and vegetables, with some grains up there and nuts also. So why is that? It's because beef, lamb, and also goat, they have a special digestive system, and they actually burp out a lot of methane because of their digestive system. Methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. So if we're eating lamb and beef and goat, then we're having a huge climate impact. I like to think of lamb or beef as a treat, as a once in a while, beef as a treat rather than as something that we're eating, say, daily or weekly. So, but that kind of indicates what I just said about a treat. I'm not saying that everybody should go vegan, right? So, first place, it's probably a little bit unrealistic for people in the U.S. to go vegan. But the other big concern is people in developing countries. They're needing to eat protein produced from animals if they don't have other sources of protein. So for them, just getting enough protein is a big issue. It's not for us. So if we can go on to the next slide, thank you. So you can see in this slide different diets and their potential for reducing climate emissions. So vegan is definitely the best. It's going to reduce climate emissions the most. But even just reducing meat somewhat, like reducing red meat for a healthy diet, is still going to have an impact on reducing climate emissions from the normal American diet. And then other things like Mediterranean diet, you're probably familiar with, that also is rich in fruit and vegetables, maybe rich in fish, which have less of a climate impact, low in beef. They're also going to have an impact. So I don't think we're going to get 50% of the world to veganism, maybe next year, but probably not tomorrow. And so I think we need to think about that we can all do something, though, to reduce our red meat consumption. That's the most important thing.
Right. One of the funniest parts of your book and most dramatic is when you go dumpster diving with your sons. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that story?
Yeah. So those are my 2 sons. And the one on the left eating that donut from Tops, actually.
From the trash?
Yeah. It had tops on it, but it was in a dumpster. he kind of follows my work. And so he said, okay, Mom, if you're going to be writing about this, you have to try it out. And I said, okay, Bjorn, if you're going to make me try it out, I'm not going out to the dumpster divers in the middle of the night.
Right.
Or
alone.
Right. And definitely not in midday when people can see me. So you're coming with me. So they both came with me. This was in Ithaca. We started we tried to start at Aldi's, but a lot of stores now have, like, their trash goes directly into a container, so you can't really get to it. But Green Star, the co-op, for those of you who know Ithaca, actually had, little trash, like regular trash cans, not a dumpster, and we got some apple that was pretty good, a carrot. Anyways, we kind of went down the line to Tops, and now there's a Trader Joe's. The highlight was Wegmans, because they also had one of these containers where the food goes directly into it, but at the end of the container there was a slot. And my younger son Sylvan, he put his hand up into the slot, and it was like a slot machine.
Yeah.
And all this stuff started coming out, like alcoholic seltzers with all kinds of weird flavors and some other delicious snacks. And so that was really fun. But I think the point is, we should have more food donation programs. We don't need to have all this waste. And of course we do. In Ithaca have the Friendship Donation Network food donation program. Wegmans, other grocery stores contribute to that, and then it gets redistributed to people who are hungry. And I have talked to a bunch of people that when they were in college, like 20 years ago, they used to feed themselves totally from dumpster diving. But now it's a little bit more difficult because it's a lot more contained. But we did, as you can see, we got some donuts, we got those seltzers, we got some different snack packs.
And something like 30% of all the food in the United States is not eaten.
30 to 40%, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy. We can save money as well as have a big impact on reducing our emissions.
Right. A lot of the examples in your book come from Network Climate Action Fellows. Tell us about this program and how you got the idea for it. And what's your very favorite example of a Fellows project?
Yeah, so I have done Network Climate Action with what we call the Cornell Climate Online Fellow Program. And that was a program where we had about 30 participants from different, usually about 28 countries from around the world. And you really meet people through these online things. Just as an aside, we had a fellow from Afghanistan who's now a master's student at Cornell. So
wow.
Yeah, it's really fun. But one of my favorite fellows was Fatima Delgado. She's from Ecuador, but she was living in Barcelona, and she was a PhD student at the time at a university in Barcelona. And she did a program called Sustainable Tapas. So what she did was she invited her other PhD students over, and she would serve them plant-rich meals, kind of like Danielle did. And but she went a step further, and she actually launched this nonprofit called Sustainable Tapas. As you can see there, it says, a simple change in your habits can help the planet. And she's really continued with this idea of trying to influence not only her friends, but also she goes up a little bit to the policy level, or a little higher anyway. She's talked with grocery stores, governments, and this whole idea of sustainable tapas.
That's great.
So I think now we're going to go into another short student video. This one's from Tim. He's from Shenzhen, China. And so we have the fellows, which are, as I mentioned, they're professionals or grad students from all over the world. And then we have also the students doing this project. And Tim did a food waste project with his parents in Shenzhen. So I think we're going to have him talk about that for a few minutes.
So hello, my name is Tianzhen Jia. You can just call me Tim. I'm a senior student majoring in environment and sustainability. Last semester, I was a part of Professor Marianne's climate solution capsule, where I focused on reducing the food waste for my final project. I involved myself and also my family in a month-and-a-half long experiment because I believe that food waste is often well overlooked. And when it comes to the impact of climate change, well, like other topics such as fossil fuel use, deforestation, and industrial emission are commonly discussed and a significant contributor to the carbon emission. But also think about like food waste, like how easy we can manage it, and it still have very big impact to climate change. And so to conduct my experiment, I first created a control group and an experiment group. So during the first week, I did not intervene my family at all, and instead asked them to send me the daily pictures of their plates before and after they ate. And after that, I used various tools I learned from that class, such as like action-related knowledge, the panic principles, and social media to pursue them to reduce the food waste regularly. And in the beginning, the situation was very bad. Nearly half to 60% of the food was waste. And in the one-on-one conversation with my parents, I learned the main reason for the food waste was very interesting. That my mom told me like my dad sometimes went to the restaurant for dinner with his colleagues, but my mom still prepared dinner for him, and so that's the result like an actual food ending up being thrown away. And so the most effective tool I used was the choice architecture, where I asked my mom just to use the smaller plates for meals and check with my dad every day before making dinner and to prepare the right amount of food. And by the end of the experiment, I observed a significant reduction in food waste. Over the course of a 6 weeks experiment, food waste was reduced from the maximum, that's from like almost half to 60%, to the final, which is around like 10% and almost no waste at all. I also applied what I learned from this experiment to myself. And because I'm a student with meal plan, I eat like most time in the student in the school cafeteria buffet. So where I just reduce the amount of food I take every time. And also I found there's like a food reduction or my food waste reduction on my own eating habit. And what I found most valuable from this experiment is that the best way to change habit is to avoid it. And choice architecture helped me realize the small change can make a big difference. And it is essential to involve everyone to reduce any food waste.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim. I just thought Tim's project was, I hate to use the word, but it was very cute, because the whole issue was that they were wasting about 50% of the food, throwing out about 50% of the food that his mom cooked every day, prepared every day. And the reason was really simple. His dad would stop by and eat with colleagues on the way home from work and not tell his mom. So Tim talked to them about it, and his dad started texting his mom that he wasn't coming home that night, she wouldn't prepare food, and they were able to have a big impact on how much food they were wasting. So, yeah, so that was
Cool. Chris, are there any questions from the audience?
We do have a couple questions. There's a question from Peter, and this is kind of a callback to something we were talking about a little bit earlier. Peter asked, what are offsets? So we need some clarity on that.
Yeah, so offsets are basically paying some money to compensate for our greenhouse gas emissions. And the offsets I was talking about are travel emissions, air travel emissions. And the idea is you calculate a cost of carbon, a dollar cost per pound of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere, and then you figure out how many pounds of CO2 were produced according to how far you traveled.
But you can't pay the atmosphere, so
No.
you have to.
Yeah, so offsets are pretty controversial, and the Finger Lakes Climate Fund is not a certified offsets program. There are certified offsets program, and they will be much more formal. They'd have to be, have reviewed by experts, and they might be doing things like carbon sequestration through planting trees or other means.
I think there was another question.
There
on the
is.
same
There's a
topic.
question from Peter Freed related to the Finger Lakes Fund, who asks, how much is the offset price for at Finger Lakes Fund? Some companies use corrupt offset organizations for greenwashing, paying $10 to $15 to claim that they offset a ton of greenhouse gas emissions, while we know the social cost of carbon is some number between $60 and several hundred for a ton of greenhouse gas. Marianne, a few things to dissect there, but
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly what their offset is price, but I think it's more in that $15 range. So, obviously Peter's raising some very good issues, very important issues about offsetting. The best thing to do would be reduce or not do air travel. I find that's pretty unrealistic. I mean, I can change my diet quite easily, but my kids live in Europe and in Colorado, and I'm not going to give up total air travel. I've tried to give up a lot of work air travel, but not family air travel, because it's really important for me to still connect with my kids. So I could go to one of these official offsets programs that's maybe more, credible, but I really like supporting a local organization. Finger Lakes Climate Fund is part of Sustainable Tompkins. Our county is Tompkins County. And I like the fact that even though they might not be sequestering carbon through planting trees, they're helping people in our local area to weatherize their homes, low-income people. So that's why I chose them. But I certainly realize how big an issue air travel is, and it's just a really hard one to crack.
In the book, you reveal some of what you've done at Cornell around this with students and colleagues is considered officially to be against the rules around activism and faculty. Can you tell us about those rules and why you decided to break them?
Yeah. So Cornell, we're a land-grant school. We get government money. We're subject to what's called the Hatch Act, which means that faculty on work time, this doesn't mean volunteer time, but on work time, or if we're representing Cornell, we have to be very careful about what we advocate for. And especially, we're not going to support certain candidates or something like that. On the other hand, as you and I were discussing earlier, these rules are a little bit fuzzy because as experts, we can certainly share our knowledge if somebody asks us, whether it be a business or a congressperson or representative, state representative, whomever. But why did I decide to break the rules? I just should go back a little on the rules. I've had colleagues tell me that, there's no way they would have their students, at Cornell students in particular, get involved in advocacy because they just felt too uncomfortable that we're strictly an educational organization. But I feel differently because I feel like we're in a crisis. We've seen that over and over again in the last several years with flooding and heat waves and smoke in Ithaca. Some of the worst air quality in the world, I guess, was in Ithaca a couple weeks ago. So if you're in an emergency, you don't follow the rules. If there's a fire here, we're not going to keep sitting here. We're going to escape as fast as we can, regardless of what the rules are for this talk that we're doing today. So that's why I decided to break the rules, because I truly believe this is so important. This is such an emergency that we need to do something about it. And the way I've done that is, one, I make it optional. So students have to do a network climate action, but they can choose which action. They also do a team project. These are my Cornell students in my Climate Solutions capstone course. And one of the team, they can choose one of several, so not all of them are advocacy. Some of them are working with, say, an NGO or a business. But one of them is working with an organization called Climate Action Now. That's a phone app. You can search it. You can download it, Climate Action Now. And it's free to download. And what it does is we have people like me, and now some of my students were content creators. So that means we create advocacy letters, essentially. So that letters will be, I'm working on the Farm Bill now, farm legislation, because farms have, as you know from plant-rich diet and food waste, have a lot to do with climate emissions. So it could be something like support gleaning programs, or support food donation programs, or support curbside pickup of organic waste in the Farm Bill or some other legislation. And so we'll compose these letters. They have to be 1,000 characters or less. And then you download the app. Have you done it yet, Emily? Okay, well, tonight. We'll wait till the end of our session here.
Okay,
You
thanks.
download the app, and then you'll see all these actions. It'll say, like, support food donation programs in the Farm Bill, and you'll say either skip it, it's on your phone, or you'll say do it now. If you do it now, the letter comes up that I might have written or my students have written. You read it, you can edit it if you want, but it's on your phone, so you're probably going to send it pretty much as is.
Right.
And then with one click, you can send it to your representative. You don't need to go to your representative's website, for example, and copy and paste. What you will do is, because you've already registered your address, it knows that your representative is Molinaro. It knows your senators are Schumer and Gillibrand, and it will send it directly to them. So it's very easy for you. You just click, yes, I want to do it now, and you click and it goes to them.
Handy.
So basically it's a way to make advocacy very easy.
Yeah. When we were working on this book together, I was working as your editor, and it was such a eye-opening experience. I learned a lot reading the book. And the book didn't have a title yet. So we were brainstorming together titles, and I kept thinking, if Malcolm Gladwell hadn't already taken it, that The Tipping Point would be a great title for your book. Describe to us how you think we could reach a tipping point where, as a society, we could sort of go into overdrive and quickly fix the climate crisis.
Like tomorrow.
Right.
Okay. So I talked some about lifestyle behaviors, plant-rich diet, food waste, reducing food waste, and I talked about advocacy and policy behaviors. There's always been a long-standing debate in any kind of activism, right? Is it something I change myself in my home, my lifestyle actions, turn off the lights, recycling the old ones, or we know now, more impactful ones about diet and food waste? Or is really the only thing that I should be doing is demonstrating, or you might have read about the Montana youth lawsuit against the state of Montana, where youth are now saying that the state of Montana is liable for not protecting them against climate change.
Yeah.
So those are policy actions. We've also had examples of governors, like Governor Paulus in Colorado, Mayor Adams in New York City, where they've declared like meatless Mondays because they're supporting this plant-rich diet. They get tons of negative feedback, pushback, like, what are you doing to the dairy industry? What are you doing to the meat industry? And so policies are not necessarily going to be effective if society is not to the place where they can accept those policies. So that's where individual action and especially network action, climate action comes in. So if you and Chris and our families, we start eating plant-rich diets, vegan, Mediterranean, whatever works for you, then these behaviors spread, more and more people are doing them. Then when Mayor Adams in New York City or Mayor Lewis in Ithaca proclaim meatless Mondays, or they say the hospital is now going to have a healthy food, climate and individual health food procurement policy, we're probably not going to push back as much because it's already becoming somewhat of a norm within society. So the point is that policy and lifestyle action systems change and individual change, they interact kind of like a feedback, a positive feedback. And so to reach that tipping point, I think we need to be thinking about both kinds of actions, not try to demonize one or the other, not try to be polarized, and also think about network climate action. And regardless if we're doing advocacy or going to a protest or changing our diet, how can we involve our family and friends alongside us?
Yeah. Toward the end of our work together on this book, you got the idea that you would like to illustrate it with cartoons. And luckily, I happen to be a cartoonist. And I was very flattered and excited that you asked me to draw some drawings for this. We decided that we would space them evenly throughout the book, have each section have at least one drawing, and I would come up with lists of jokes because I wanted them to be sort of funny, but illustrative of a concept. And then you would tell me which jokes you didn't get or which ones were a good example for that part of the book. And that's how we came up with the cartoons. Can you talk about what your favorite cartoon in the book is? I think there's like 14 cartoons or something altogether.
Well, I loved all the cartoons, Emily.
Thank you. And that was a real softball for me. Thank you.
Okay. So, but you made me choose one. So I like this one. This is, for those of you not familiar with the Rockettes, and you told me the Rockettes still exist.
Yes.
Do you want to explain what the Rockettes are? I think
That's this awesome show in New York City where they, young dancers who have to be at least 5'8", do these great holiday dances with high kicks and big headgear.
Right, and high heels, right,
Yeah.
too. And so this one says, in her role as a mother and investment banker, Megan was ideal. As a Rockette, less so. So obviously Megan's that poor, short woman like us over on the left. And the term here, the important term, is role and ideal. So the philosopher Robin Zeng, who I think is at Yale now, and she came up with this idea of role ideals. And that has to do with our responsibility. Could be for anything, social justice, climate, whatever. And the whole idea is we all have roles in life. Like you and I are both mothers. We have jobs. We're, employees or directors of institutions like you are. And that in each of our roles, we have a role ideal. What would be the ideal way that I would be acting in that role? What would be the best way in my mind I could do? And we can bring climate into that.
Right. Like as a mother, if I'm a mother who's really good at fighting climate change, what do I do? It would probably have to do something with what I cook for my kid, or what I teach her about using leftovers, or how I teach her how to shop or something.
Yeah, and how you dumpster dive with her too. So no, but the point is, I know you're a great mother. I'm assuming.
I'm really
just from knowing you,
just middle of the road, actually.
No, I think you're a great. I'm sure you have lots of ideals for how to be a mother, and just the point is, you could add some climate concerns or climate ideas into that ideal role.
Right. So, I think that's to you, Chris.
Okay, good. Yeah, there is a question that came in from Lorianne. This one's a little bit tough, but I think it's worth exploring. Lorianne asks, has anyone studied the land required to grow veggies for the needs of a plant-based diet? Because land use will change, right? And will have its own particular effect. Do you know anything about that? How that might work? How that might shake out if we were to all, let's say, aspire to, get close to reaching an ideal where we're all plant-based? What would happen?
Well, I guess I would take issue of the question,
Yeah.
because so much of the land, and I'm sorry I don't have the figures right now, but so if you fly over and pay offsets because you're flying, whether they're real or more informal like the ones that I do, you would notice that so much of the U.S. is in corn and soybeans, right? You would just see fields and fields and fields and fields, right? I think it's 40% of that, maybe more, is going to cattle. I'm sorry, I don't have the percentage, but a large percentage of that, it has to be more than 40%, right? Because a lot of that is not sweet corn. So it's going to cattle feed. I think it might even be 80%. But anyways, don't quote me on it. But so all that land where we're producing all that feed to feed cows could then be used for growing grains that we're eating directly.
Instead.
Right? And because the cat, it's sort of like one stage less in the food chain, right? The cattle aren't completely efficient in converting this to calories or protein. If it goes directly to us, we take out that whatever's lost in that process. Land use, though, is super important. And where I think it comes in is, sadly, we all want to go with some of the more sustainable practices like regenerative agriculture, and sometimes those practices are not as efficient as some of the industrial agriculture. So we can have industrial agriculture that's super efficient, even though it has all these other externalities like water pollution, air pollution, cruelty to animals. We may be able to save some land that would be used if we didn't have that really concentrated agriculture. So I think we need to do a couple of things. One, we need to figure out how, with the more climate-friendly or environmental-friendly regenerative practices, how we can make them more productive so we don't have to have more and more land in agriculture. Because when we convert land to agriculture to grow more food for a growing U.S. human population, that means we're cutting down the trees, all that carbon's being released, and we're disturbing the soil, which also is storing a lot of carbon. So we definitely have to be very concerned about land use practices and trying to make agriculture as efficient as possible. And of course, I'll just add one more thing. It's possible we're going to go to these, what were called alt proteins and alt carbohydrates. We're going to be using precision fermentation and cellular-based agriculture, and we might have factories. Some people think that, in 10, 50 years, we're going to be just eating food that comes out of these factories, which will end up having a very small, at least, land use footprint.
Right. I know we have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you about your personal journey to becoming a climate activist. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So when I started writing this book, as I mentioned, I've really struggled a lot with these questions. What is my responsibility? And I mentioned in the book that I'm a plocker, which means I pick up litter while walking. And I do that on my way to work. I walk to work, and I do it very early in the morning. It's usually dark. And so I have a lot of time to reflect on these questions. And really, when I started thinking about the book, the only actions I was doing were lifestyle actions, like, reducing meat consumption, then food waste. But in writing the book, I became involved in several climate nonprofits and climate groups. One's Elders Climate Action, Climate Reality Project, which is Al Gore's project, and then Climate Action Now, the app that I mentioned. And I discovered, and it seems sort of obvious now, that the way to get involved in policy is not to try to do it on my own, but try to do it with these organizations. And the reason is because these organizations, for example, Elders Climate Action, they have these volunteers with this incredible wealth of knowledge, because a lot of us are retired, and they might have worked at very high levels in the EPA or been a college professor. And so together they really know a lot about all these different climate policies that are coming online, and then we can do things to support these policies. So that's kind of my journey from lifestyle to getting involved in policy.
Right. And then I think in the book you talk a little bit about that helping to alleviate some despair. And despair is one of the main premises of the book, that a lot of us feel despair or panic about the climate crisis. And you point out in the book something really fundamental, which is that industry like oil and gas, they are partly responsible for turning the focus on individual people and away from themselves, even though they probably, is this true, have a bigger footprint, a bigger impact on the climate than an individual person. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this all started with the Crying Indian campaign. You're probably too young to remember it, but this was in the 60s or 70s. Sorry, I can't remember. But the whole idea was that two companies, Coca-Cola and Dixie Cup, the plastic cups, they got together and sort of did this major television,
campaign. Yeah, I remember it. It was the 70s because I was a kid in the 70s.
Okay. So and, this guy wasn't really an Indian, but the idea was that he was an actor and he was crying because all these people were littering the landscape and ruining the landscape. And people start pollution and people can stop it. So they didn't look at, Coca-Cola's producing all these things that we're littering, or Dixie Cup is. Maybe they should think about, what they're sending to us or asking us to consume, that we, the consumer, had total responsibility. And that's certainly gone on with the oil industry today. I heard some testimony. I was watching it on YouTube on Capitol Hill with the oil companies and climate. There was a hearing, and I think the CEO of one of the oil companies, they were asked about EVs, and she said, well, there's still such a demand for gas cars that we can't really switch to EVs. And
electric vehicles?
Yeah, electric vehicles. And so, I just felt like she was blaming the consumer, like we need our leaders to take some action, and then, I think a lot of us will follow on, especially with electric vehicles now, because they're becoming more and more common.
Right. Following up on that idea of despair, and this is my last question, how do you remain hopeful? The book, I think the book did make me both. It made me more alarmed than I had been because I learned a lot, but it also did provide some hope. Can you talk about where you're finding hope?
Well, Robin Kimmerer, she's an author and a professor at Syracuse. She talks about environmental despair and how easy it is to despair about the environment, but she also talks about environmental despair as being a poison. So, the point is that if we are all to despair, then we're going to be incapacitated. We're not going to be able to do anything about it.
Right.
Second point is, if we do about it, even though, a lot of times we hear in the media, oh gosh, I would never want an EV, or I never want to get rid of my gas stove. Well, it turns out some of these things can be meaningful and even fun, as we've seen with the Plant-Rich Diet Network, Climate Action, doing things with family and friends. And so, I think the other point I just make is that with the civil rights movement in the 50s, people could have easily despaired. They could have thought, like, how could we ever change anything, right? But they didn't. They tried, and they were actually successful. And I think working with others brought also meaning to their individual lives. So I think we need to just think of it that way. We're going to be healthier, actually, if we don't despair, and we have some opportunities to make a difference. And I think we are seeing some changes in the way people are thinking about the climate.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, there's a comment from Neva, who's relieved that she is not the only plucker.
Oh, okay, great.
She thought she was the only one picking up other people's trash, and her dog gets frustrated with her.
I can imagine.
All right, we have a call back from, who was this? Anne, this is a little ways back, but was asking for some clarity on the Pennsylvania reference, the person's work who was mentioned about networking. Who was that?
His name is Damon Centola. You spell the last name Centola. And he's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And he has a very strong web presence. So you can see animations of how behaviors spread. He has 2 books. One's called Change. That's more recent. It's a more popular book. His previous book is, now I'm forgetting. But anyways, find Damon Centola, Centola. He's it's a unique name at UPenn, and you'll find him.
Perfect, good. Thank you for that. No, I don't have any further questions, but I do want to tip our audience to the QR code that accompanies the book cover there. Again, we want to thank our friends at Cornell University Press for extending the 33% discount on the book using the shoot, what is this? I have a promotional code for you. There you go. 09SAVE. At that URL.
Can I give just a little shout out to my husband, Marshall Hopkins, who designed the beautiful cover of this book? Yeah.
What a small town we are.
Such a small town.
Good work on the book cover. Thank you. Yeah, I commented how much I really liked it. So I want to thank both of you for coming in today. It's been lovely to work with you, Marianne, over the last couple months. And Emily, lovely to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks.
Thank you to our viewers for the commentary and questions. We really appreciate it. Just to mention real quick, this is live. The recording will be available very shortly after this. So thanks everyone for joining. Stay strong, stay safe. We'll see you at the next keynote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.